To that point, we recently lost a legal giant in Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose strong voice spoke so loudly in favor of gender equality. She was absolutely relentless in her lifelong fight for justice. Take a look.
There's a great man once said that
let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Cocktails and Convo.
Thank you once again for joining me for another episode of Cocktails and Convo. 2020 just continues to hit us with the likeness of right hooks from Mike Tyson in his prime. Although a right hook, jab, or even a grimace from Mike during any phase in his life would not be welcomed by me in the slightest. To that point, we recently lost a legal giant in Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose strong voice spoke so loudly in favor of gender equality. She was absolutely relentless in her lifelong fight for justice. Take a look.
there's a great man once said that the true symbol of the United States is not the bald eagle, it is the pendulum. And when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, it will go back. People ask me, when would you be satisfied with the number of women on the court? When there are 9.
Obviously, civil rights and equal rights are not solely associated in just the field of employment. And yet another example of injustice in America, after months of protesting and chanting, "Say her name," we finally heard from the grand jury in Kentucky that no cops would be held accountable for Breonna Taylor's death. You know, Breonna Taylor didn't quite enjoy the fruits of her constitutional rights because they were simply not protected. What's crazy is that in Kentucky, they actually believe in the castle doctrine, which means you have a right to defend your home against intruders, even if using deadly force. So if there was no charge against Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, for defending his home, how can there not be charges against those who barged into his home? Look, I'm not a lawyer at all, but that just doesn't make sense to me. Nonetheless, while Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed, in her home, her sleep was interrupted by multiple gunshots, which led to her untimely death. Another death that was felt by millions of Americans across the country and millions of our brothers and sisters around the world. Her death was a physical death. It was a visceral death. We could visualize it, we could see it, and we could feel it. And people are angry, people are outraged, people are frustrated and humiliated. And rightfully so. They should be, we all should be. Now look, not in any way, shape, or form am I attempting to minimize those egregious acts of violence that happened to Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless others. Yet we only seem to be outraged by the physical death of people of color, most particularly black people. We are outraged by the death that we see. But I have to go here, folks, and point this out. We are witnessing another type of death as well. And it's not a death of the body. It's not a physical death. As a city, we have been and are currently bearing witness to a much more significant type of death. A slow death, if you will, of our children's educational and intellectual dreams. A death of the mind. An educational death. Many of our educational systems across our country are killing the dreams of our most vulnerable population, our school-dependent children. We need to nurture our children's dreams, not destroy them, not starve them, not kill them. Look, approximately 100 years ago, a 20-year-old Langston Hughes at the time said this: "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow." In that poem, Langston Hughes essentially said this: we have to protect our children's ability to dream. And I want for us just to take a moment to focus on that concept. Focus on the visual of a bird with a broken wing. Picture that. That bird is not fulfilling its potential. It's not fulfilling its true potential. And our educational system as a whole is depriving our community, depriving our children of fulfilling their full potential, depriving our children of the capacity to dream because of the decisions we are making as educational leaders on their behalf. I said it. We continue to accept these mediocre practices, knowing they're mediocre. This notion of inequity has manifested itself into the very fabric of who we are. In many cases, we have become conditioned to settle for less, conditioned to accept less than. I refer to that behavior as accepted ignorance. This lack of foresight, concern, and consideration for our most vulnerable school-dependent children must stop. It just has to stop. We can no longer accept it as the norm. We can't accept a notion of an it is what it is way of thinking. And look, no disrespect at all. But we make sure our kids eat in school, don't we? We make sure they eat. And that's good. It's a phenomenal support that many of our families benefit from, many of our children benefit from. But we need to make sure that in addition to feeding our children's bellies, we need to make sure we feed their brain. We got to feed their soul, their spirit, their dreams. We can no longer continue depriving our children the ability to dream. I'm just convinced today, as much as I was 20 plus years ago, that education saves lives. I truly believe that. Education is the answer to all of our questions as well as our dreams. Education is what fuels our children's ability to dream, their ability to hope in spite of. Look, we have to do whatever we can to protect that hope, our children's hope. And not being able to dream, coupled with the lack of hope, enhances the risk of our children experiencing an empty shell of a life. Brian Stevenson said it best. Injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. It's that hope that keeps us moving. You know, hope against hope is what makes us continue to fight, even in spite of the deplorable conditions plaguing our communities. There are so many parents out there who believe in the promise of a quality and equitable school system, a quality and equitable education, in spite of schools having a lack of quality teachers, a lack of resources, a lack of access, etc. That's exactly why John Lewis was able to keep getting up and marching and fighting after catching a beat down and getting his head busted open on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Injustice swoops down and wins when we give up hope. Hope is our lifeline. Dreams are our soul's passion. And action is what we need now. And just in case you didn't know, hope, dreams, and action, that's what I call the perfect recipe for a revolution. We'll be right back with our first guest. My next guest is an educational giant who currently serves as the president and CEO of Eagle Academy. Please welcome to Cocktails and Convo, David Banks. David Banks, thank you so much for joining me on Cocktails and Convo. It's a pleasure to have you here.
My pleasure to be with you, Brother Sean. Absolutely thrilled to be here.
Oh man, it's definitely a pleasure. So listen, before we get into our dialogue, it's only right that we toast, so I got a little something over here. I don't know what you got, but let us toast to our continuous pursuit of educational excellence while we lay the path for others to follow. Cheers.
Sounds good. Cheers, my brother.
So let's jump right in. You're an educational advocate, somebody who I admire, follow, respect. Describe what we are seeing now in our educational system. Do you think it represents right now the best we have to offer?
Well, certainly. Let me just start out by first of all appreciate you inviting me to be here, and I admire you as well.
Oh,
and
you.
I've watched your leadership, and I've watched you grow in this system, and we need brothers just like you to continue to provide what we need on behalf of our children and our families, number one. Number two, what we're seeing right now, and I've been in the school system well over 30 years, is something unlike, I think, anything I've seen before. There's a real lack of leadership that's happening right now, and it's very, very unfortunate. And here's what I mean by that. I think good people, well-meaning people, I think the mayor means well. I think the chancellor absolutely means well. But what is required in this moment is strong, visionary leadership to deal with an emergency situation and this national pandemic that has impacted all of our families right here in New York City. Yeah. And that leadership we're not receiving right now. And it's very unfortunate, right? So here, as we sit here today, one of the biggest failures is the fact that the mayor has outlined a plan for us to return to schools, and our middle schools and high schools are going back on Thursday, and elementary schools are going back tomorrow. But the planning that is really necessary to pull off something like this is lacking. Yeah. There are far too many steps that were missed to prepare for a successful and effective opening. I don't fault the mayor for wanting to pull this off, but I fault him for not ensuring that the level of preparation that was needed to make it happened, and it did not. And I think that's the problem. Having been a school leader for as many years as I was, and now running this Eagle Foundation for over a decade, I'm a person who very much believes in leadership, and because the people need somebody to follow and to be guided by. And what we're seeing from the mayor and the chancellor, this is bad. It's really bad, and it's not only unfortunate. It's a situation right now that I think people are really stressed out, and it didn't have to be this bad, but that's where leadership comes in. And if you don't demonstrate leadership, people just start to get completely stressed out, and the whole system goes into disarray.
Well, I'll tell you that stressed out piece, people are feeling that all over. Right. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it in my house as a parent of New York City public school children. I'm feeling it. My children are feeling it. And you talked about the planning piece, right? Yeah. It requires a lot of planning, and granted, planning has been happening, but I guess my mind goes to, but what planning? Like, what were we planning for?
Right. Yeah, listen, in order to do proper planning, you have to engage the right people in that planning. I kept saying, who's at the table as they're making these decisions? Decisions were rolling out, and I'm talking to principals. They didn't know anything about it. I'm talking to superintendents. They don't know anything about it. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. If the chancellor and the mayor are making these decisions, who are you talking to if you're not talking to the people that you're expecting to execute on a plan to move forward, and they're not even at the table? Right. I'm talking to school leaders and system leaders who are getting all their information by watching the mayor and the chancellor hold press conferences. Like, that's how they're finding out information. That's what I mean when I say fundamental lack of leadership, right? Sean, we start from the premise that there were no easy answers here.
Oh, not at all. Absolutely.
Right? Everybody recognized that. The pandemic was not the mayor's fault or the chancellor's fault. But it's a challenge. It's easy to be a leader when things are going well.
Oh, come on.
The test of leadership is when you have major challenges in front of you. And this is a major challenge, and they have failed so far because they have not engaged the right folks. They've not engaged. I'm a not-for-profit leader who works with thousands of young people in the system. There are not-for-profit leaders who probably touch half the kids in the school system. None of us have been asked to be at the table to talk about what it would really take to turn this around. I was asked to be.
Right. How does leadership show up in times of chaos?
Absolutely. I was on the mayor's return to school committee. He brought about 40 leaders together from around the city. And they didn't listen to anything that we said. And the questions that they were asking us, they were asking us about How many times a day should the kids go to wash their hands? Should they eat lunch in the lunchroom or in the cafeteria? I said, why are you asking us that? You got here the president of Columbia University. You've got the president of NYU, the head of Children's Aid Society. Ask your principals those kinds of
Principals.
principals that. You should be asking us, how do we expand New York City's footprint for schools? If you know that you can't bring all the students back at one time, well, what about getting access to the New York Public Library, the local YMCA, local churches and houses of worship, where you could perhaps bring back even more students if bringing them back was what you determined to be the best course of action.
How do we recruit more qualified teachers to support the need?
Absolutely. There's so many open-ended questions that they never really dealt with. And then you have all of these delays, and the delays were not based upon the fact that you're getting new information. You know, I said the other day, I said that the mayor and the chancellor are demonstrating a level of leadership because they are failing to see the obvious that's in front of you. Some of these are just obvious things that you should have anticipated months ago. This is not new information. So all of that together, as far as I'm concerned, they should have made a decision that they made in Chicago, that they made in San Francisco, that they made in Los Angeles, which is, we don't know enough. We need to be better prepared. We're going to go all virtual. We'll keep some schools open, much like we did in the early part of this pandemic with these regional enrichment centers. Let's make sure that we can expand those a little bit, go deeper with that. But really make sure we're spending all the time that we need necessary to give our teachers the level of professional development and training that they need so that we can take virtual learning to a whole nother level. Because once the pandemic subsides, virtual learning really should be here to stay anyway.
It absolutely should be.
Right? And so it would have behooved us to really get that right. So what we found ourselves in the middle of now is a situation where we're not doing any of it right. And so we're not getting any real benefit from it at all. The mayor was determined to do this, didn't put in the time, effort, and energy to make sure he did it really well. And now we're all going to suffer as a result.
And I'm going to say this, and I hate to say it, but you know what? Like I'm a part of the system, right? I'm a part of the system, and just to be totally transparent, look, people are going to be mad at me, but I'm appalled by the fact that our number one priority, like our number one highest level of expectation at this point, is to ensure that we have bodies in front of our children.
Right.
And even saying it makes my blood boil, because it's not just about having bodies in front of our children.
That's right.
We need qualified people in front of our children who are going to nurture them, pour into them, love them, provide them with trauma-infused support and social emotional supports to get through this thing together. What's a body going to do?
They're saying we're getting 3,000 more, 5,000 more, 8,000 more. I mean, where are you getting these people from? We're just pulling people from off the sidelines, even if they were retired teachers, even if they're people who are working in central offices, to just overnight say, we're pulling you and we're putting you in buildings. That's what you mean when you say bodies. Teaching, that's not what teaching is.
No, it's not.
Teaching is built on relationships. Imagine I'm putting you in a classroom or even virtually in front of 20 of my children, and they have no idea who you are. And now you're here just for a period of time so that we can say there's a class that's covered. I don't even know that they're lining this up based upon your content background or your content expertise. They're just putting bodies in rooms to say that we have it covered. That's not what education is. And that's, again, another example of what I mean, Sean, when I say the failure of leadership. This is not the way to do this. This ad hoc, just throwing stuff together. This is not the way the system is supposed to operate.
Yeah, we got to do better. We got to do better.
Man.
Let's shift, because we can stay there all day, right? and poke holes, but I really want us to get to some different layers of fruit. I want us to find some fruit that we can serve up in a little bit. But so granted, in 2004, you opened the first Eagle Academy. What compelled you or motivated you to do that specific work?
I had already been a New York City school principal for 7 years when I became the founding principal of the Eagle Academy for Young Men, which, by the way, Eagle Academy was the first all-boys public high school in New York City in 30 years. when we opened our doors. We knew that. What we didn't know, Sean, was that there were no other all-boys public high schools in the country when we opened, right? Back in 2004. Amazing. Single-gender public schools have become politically incorrect. The reason we opened, and I say we, because this was not the David Banks story. I'm a member of the 100 Black Men of New York. It was our organization. This is a civic organization of professional men, was started almost 60 years ago by people like David Dinkins and Congressman Charlie Rangel and Percy Sutton and other real luminaries, Roscoe Brown, Tuskegee Airmen. Like, these were great men. We stand on their shoulders. And our organization decided to meet this challenge because we had always mentored young people. We'd always given out money for scholarships and that kind of thing. But we started looking at some data. And there were three very critical pieces of data that really were the impetus for us to start Eagle Academy. One was that the graduation rate at that time was only 32% for young men of color. Now think about that, 32%. That means like 7 out of 10 of our young men were not even going to graduate from high school. Wow. How in the world can they make themselves available for opportunities in industry or business or anything else when the system can't even graduate them from high school? So that was number one. Number two was the fact that 68% of Black boys were growing up without a father at home. Right? Like, this hip hop generation, by and large, has been a fatherless generation. And that is because of the so-called war on drugs, war on crime, right? Which really marked the beginning of the mass incarceration of men of color, right, removing them from their families. And it was the sons who suffered the most, not having fathers in their households to help them in that transition from boyhood to manhood. And then finally, Columbia University put out a report where they said 75% of the state's prison population were coming from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. Again, you got to think about that for a minute. The entire state of New York, 75% came from 7 very specific zip codes in New York City. It's the school to prison pipeline, right? And so people were writing books about it. They were analyzing data. They were doing all that stuff. And it seemed like the most you could hope for was a good after-school program for 20 kids. That was as good as it got. That's the reason why we said we're in the midst of an emergency. We have to lean in and do more. We didn't have all the answers, but what we had was the courage of our conviction to try and do something. And that's the reason why we launched the Eagle Academy. And that work, and I was asked to be the principal when I left my other school to head up Eagle. And from there, we have since gone on through the work of the Eagle Foundation, which I head now, to open up a school in every borough in New York City. 3,000 of these young men in our schools today, over 2,000 who graduated and gone on to colleges and universities. And now we're spreading our work nationally, helping school districts around the country figure out how to either open up an all-boys school like Eagle, or otherwise, and more importantly, teachers who are sitting in classrooms with boys and girls but have no idea how to engage these boys. How do we reverse that trend by giving them the level of professional development and best practices for the most promising ways to engage young men in the classroom? That's been the work that we've been engaged in.
Well, look, I applaud that work. Look, I've been watching that work for years. I remember coming to see you in the Bronx, and myself having 20 plus years working with middle school age children, I knew like that the boys needed something different. My boys needed something different. My girls did too, but but we gotta tailor to those needs. I used to actually have these powerful all boys forums for my kids. I even had single gender classes so that I could tap into my boys' excellence, their magic, but also tap into my girls' excellence and magic too. So what the Eagle Academy stands for, I absolutely applaud that work and salute you for that. We're going to take a quick break and we're going to be right back with the people want to know. So we are back with the people want to know, and we know that's just a segment where we just take random questions from around the city. So we're going to start with James from the Bronx. Mr. Banks, I need you to help me out with these questions. You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. So James from the Bronx wants to know, can we just skip to December 31st, 2020?
Hey, man, listen, tell James I'm with him as well, right? It's been a rough go. This promises to be the most difficult and challenging year that we have had. hopefully we're going to have a new we'll have a new administration in Washington. Not only fingers crossed, but folks have got to come out and vote.
Absolutely.
Right? And make that happen, because December 2020, 31st, still represents the same thing if we don't get out there and get involved and make it happen.
Yeah,
so we can't just dream it, wish it. We have to make it happen. One of the things we saw recently with the NBA, these guys are walking around with the shirts on and vote and enough and all of that. And all of those things are great, right? But again, they're symbolic moves. And they found out that only 20% of the NBA players are even registered to vote.
How crazy.
Let me just think about that. So I can only imagine the numbers are probably similar with the NFL players as well. So all these guys taking the knee, we down with Kaepernick, all of that, but they're not even registered to be in the game. See, so it's more than just hoping for a new day. There are things that we have to do to be in this game and to be prepared to make the kind of change that we want to see happen. And that goes beyond the rally, beyond the protests. Then there are some real next steps that we have to take. And those are things that we need to be doing. And voting is number one.
James, you heard it. We got to get out there and we got to vote. And not just vote, but vote with a plan. Vote with an agenda in place. Get out to the polls, but make sure you got a plan in place so that your vote really means something. And then hold those elected officials accountable too. So, James, you heard it. We can't just skip. We wish we could, but we can't. But get out there and vote to make change. All right, so look. This one's from me. This for me. I know you represent Southeast Queens. Where's the best place to eat in Southeast Queens? I'm hungry.
You know, that's funny. That's a good question. We'll probably have to check with my brothers on that. I haven't been. I grew up, but I left when I was about 18 years old. Okay. So some of the spots that I was hitting back then are long gone.
Might not be the same spot.
Right. But you know, I spend most of my time in Harlem now. That's where my office is.
Right.
And Red Rooster is certainly my favorite spot on the Harlem scene. Marcus Samuelson up there. And,
that's definitely one of my favorite spots too. I love that spot.
Yeah. But you know, there's all kind of great restaurants depending upon what you like to eat. And my brothers are still in the Southeast Queens area. So I'll get back to you with the Southeast Queens favorite spots.
Yeah, hit me up. Let me know.
Will do.
Okay. Tamika from Queens. Her son is in the 7th grade, has an IEP, is struggling academically. Please help. What advice would you give to Tamika?
You know, again, we hear that a lot, right? But it's all still about the connection with the school, right? So is it Tamika?
Tamika, yep.
Tamika, yeah. Tamika, school works for the parents who get most involved and hold the schools accountable, right? So you've got to make sure you're building a strong relationship with the principal, a strong relationship with each one of your child's teachers. A lot of times we get caught up talking about the system as a whole, and I certainly do that. But you as a parent, Tamika, you're not sending your child to a system. You're sending your child to a very specific school.
Bingo.
And you need to be involved. They need to know who you are. You need to be the biggest advocate for your child.
Yes.
Not to say that it's going to be easy, right? I don't know the particulars around what his IEP represents, but I do know that whether your child has an IEP or does not have an IEP, the children that get the most out of their school experience are when their parents are actively engaged and involved and hold that school accountable for delivering on what they're supposed to deliver for your child. It would be great if everybody got what they were supposed to get. That's not always the case. And so, you know, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so you've got to stay very active, very engaged, and making sure that they know who you are and that you're holding them accountable. That's
Absolutely.
Always the best way to get started.
Tamika, you heard it from Mr. Banks. You got to get involved. And Tamika, don't assume that they know what the issue is. Like, reach out to them, communicate as often as you can with the teacher, the principals. Let them know exactly what your child needs to be successful. And then
you know something, Sean. There are a lot of Tamikas out there, and they love their children and they want the best for them. And I hear those questions a lot. And then we'd ask the school, and the school would say, And she dropped that child off 3 years ago. We haven't seen her since. She doesn't come to any PA meetings. She doesn't show up here. Like we barely know who she is. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that that's Tamika. I'm just simply saying that's what you have to do. You have to stay engaged. I was a very good student as a child. And yet my father was at that school all the time. He didn't take anything for granted. In every grade, from first grade, at least all the way through middle school, my dad was always around. And everybody knew him. They knew my mother as well, but my dad was a police officer.
Right.
So he would just show up, you know, sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. But they knew who he was, and he held not only the school to account, but he held me to account, right? To make sure that I was holding my end of the bargain as well. The success in school is a joint partnership between the school, the parent, and the child. Everybody's got to do their part.
Absolutely. Everybody has a part to play. You heard it, Tamika. You heard it. Look, we're going to just continue on with our dialogue. So we know that things need to change. Speak specifically about what you believe our system needs right now.
The pandemic notwithstanding, we are not doing right collectively by our children in our public school system. And there's some very specific things that we have to do to change it. So when I say we're not doing right, here's what I mean. We do a really good job, Sean, of schooling. We don't do a great job of educating. And there's a difference.
About that.
So a year ago, I was watching on TV and I saw all of these young people all across America hitting the streets, standing up about climate change, essentially saying to all adults and the powers that be, we're the young people, we're the people that are going to inherit this planet Earth. And you adults are screwing it up and you're going to make it really bad for us. And we've got something to say about that. And I was so inspired to watch all of these young people right out there on the front lines, letting their voices be heard and speaking truth to power. But when you skinned it, you realize, I said, where are the children of color? Where are the Black kids? They were almost nowhere to be seen.
Wow.
And you know what I realized, again, I already knew it intuitively, but to see it in that moment, it was like, it was all these white kids who are being prepared for leadership. And where were the Black kids? They were in school, doing their work. You see what I mean? So this whole notion around doing my work. Most of us as parents, we ask your child when they come home from school, how was school? Fine. Right? Because they're going through the good, right? They're going through the routine of school.
Right.
They're not engaged in stuff that is deeply thought-provoking and that ultimately prepares them to be game changers down the line. They're not getting that kind of exposure. When Bill de Blasio became mayor of New York City, you know that he won with only 14% of eligible voters even voting? People don't vote in presidential elections. They don't vote in state elections. They don't vote in municipal elections, city council elections. Sometimes it's just a few hundred people that even come out to vote. Why is that? We're not preparing people to be active, engaged citizens because we're not giving them those kinds of experiences throughout their K-12 experience.
Which could absolutely happen in the school system.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what should be happening. Imagine if your son or daughter was coming home and saying, hey, Dad, what kind of healthcare system, what kind of healthcare plan do you have? Because in school, we're studying the healthcare plans across America, and we're comparing it to those in Canada and Sweden to try to determine who has the best healthcare system in the world, and what can we do here in America, right? Kids are not learning how a bill is passed. They're not learning how money is made in this country, how to become an entrepreneur and start your own business. They go literally from kindergarten through the 12th grade. We as taxpayers have spent over $300,000 in New York City alone, which is not even enough money. But if you use that as a baseline, $300,000 per child. And most of these kids can't even tell you what a city council person does. They barely can tell you the difference between an assemblyman, a congressperson. When I used to watch the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and he would do this walk down Hollywood Boulevard, stopping ordinary Americans. and asking them very basic questions, and they couldn't answer them. And people got a laugh out of it. But think about it, it's a sad indictment. All these people are high school graduates, but we're not preparing our people to really be woke and to understand what's really going on. That's how a Donald Trump can come into our midst when you have a populace which is essentially asleep because the school system has done little to nothing to prepare them to be woke, number one. Number two is the notion of teaching the truth in American history, right? The story of Black folks in this country is something that everybody needs to know. Not just Black
1619
children.
Project is one way.
Absolutely. The 1619 Project is a place we can start, right? Skip Gates has done so much out of Harvard, right, with this work. The resources are there. What we need is a system that will ensure that happens. And so Black folks need to know who we are, because when you know who we are, the contributions we made, and we weren't just slaves, and then there was the civil rights movement, right, and Martin Luther King, that we are so much more than that. When you know that, you're filled with a sense of pride, which gives you that fuel that you need to go on to drive toward excellence. But also, all the other folks need to know who we are. They need to know that we fought, bled, died, and built this country. Absolutely. America became a super economic power on the backs of free labor over hundreds of years that no other country had that. That's why America is what it is today. But when folks don't understand that, then that's what allows somebody to put their knee on your neck for 8.5 minutes until the life goes out of your body, because he doesn't even see you as somebody who has any worth at all. Our school system also has a level of accountability for that, because we're not teaching anybody that Black folks matter in any sense of the word in this nation. That can change. That needs to change. But again, it all comes down to leadership to make it happen.
So let's go there. You hit it on the head. You said we need to really focus on teaching real world experiences to our children from day one. We need to really teach our children. I mean, 70% of our system looks like us. So we need to teach them about us. So let's say the torch gets passed to you. The torch is passed to you, Chancellor Banks. How do we get there?
First of all, you got to engage lots of different constituencies. The state Board of Regents is one that has to be engaged. Why? Because the state Board of Regents are the ones who are most responsible for the policy for the entire state of New York. One of the reasons why people find it very difficult to engage in the kinds of real world, authentic experiences that fully engage young people, provoke critical thinking, and have them really engaged in school is because everybody is locked down by high stakes testing that we have to do. The amount of tests that we have to take from the 3rd grade through the 12th grade is ridiculous. But it's because of that, that's how a principal is measured. That's how a school is measured. So we're measuring purely this cognitive skill development. We're not measuring non-cognitive skill development at all. We haven't invested in that. So you have to get the state to be an ally in this. You have to make the case of why we are depriving our young people of a great school experience and opportunity to be truly educated, and help them understand that testing really reinforces schooling. It doesn't reinforce education. So so you have to you have to be the champion for it, first of all. And part of the reason by you're being a champion, part of the process of being that champion is you got to get parents engaged. Absolutely. You have to help parents understand that your child is being shortchanged every day. Let me tell you something really dramatic. People are concerned because of this pandemic, and our kids have fallen so far behind. I contend that our kids could have been out of school for over a year, and in many ways haven't missed that much at all.
Wow.
Because what they are going through is a schooling experience. They're not going through an education experience in the first place. So and it's not an indictment on our teachers, it's an indictment on the way the system is designed in the first place. And there are folks systems that are set up where they don't want us to be woke. Imagine if every imagine this for a moment, Sean, if every high school senior was graduating this year from a New York City high school, and part of their responsibility was to go to the city council hearings, to know who their city council person is, and to show up at their town halls as part of the requirements for graduating even from your high school, right?
The knowledge gained from something like that would be life-changing. It'd be pivotal.
I mean, it connects everything to why you're in school in the first place, right? Imagine if we tied all of that to you even being able to get out of school. You need to understand these issues around what's happening with the police department and guns in our community and drugs in our community and just all the issues around how a community actually operates. Are people aware of what a community board is and the power that they have? If you want to open up a business in your community, you have to go to the local community board.
Right.
Our kids don't know that. Our parents don't know that. A handful do, but most have no idea how the levers of power and influence. Imagine if you were exposing them to that since they were in the 4th or 5th grade.
Game change.
You have a different level of elected official. You got folks who are now going to be elected who've got to be accountable. They would make it their business to go and speak in every high school, every middle school, because they realize, like, in a minute, these are going to be my constituents, and they know what's going on. So right now,
the potential of excellence that would stem from our young folks who would then be inspired to enter those positions or run for those positions, right?
That's right. And you get the best from our community.
Yes.
A lot of times right now, we don't get the best from our community, even running for these positions. They go and doing other things. And we need the best and brightest to be in these positions to lead us in the proper way and not be so subject to corruption and those kinds of things where we don't get the most out of the leadership from our community leaders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, I thank you. And I do want to ask you one final question. And I'll say this. So, and I've mentioned it earlier, I look up to you. I view you as a mentor. I'm watching how you move and shake because I'm always trying to soak up excellence from others who look like me. So I thank you for that. But if you had a message to some hungry young folks out there who could be watching and just need a word of encouragement to push them through this time, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that God, in his infinite wisdom, when he created the universe, the sun, the moon, and the stars, the most unique creation that God ever made is you. Think about this. Since the beginning and the fullness of time, and for time evermore, when God made you, he broke the mold. There was never another one like you before, and there will never be another one exactly like you afterwards. Are there people that have your name? There are people who might be your height, they look like you. People will say, hey man, I saw a guy, he looks like your twin. But they're not you. You are uniquely created. And you're not self-created. You were brought here for a reason. There is something that you must bring to this world. You are only here for a short period of time. Even if you live to be an old man or woman and be 100 years old, that's but a vapor of all eternal creation and all eternal life.
We are only here. We're here for a moment. And
only
in
here
that
for a moment.
While you were here, be the best version of yourself.
Make it count.
David Banks, it's been a pleasure to have you on Cocktails and Convo. I wish you continued success, and I'm watching you. Cocktails and Convo.
And I'm watching you too. I'm proud of you too, my brother.
Cheers.
God bless you.
Just sitting here chopping it up with my team, man, around the state of our educational system. And, oftentimes I'm taking deep breaths and holding back how I'm feeling in order to portray a certain image, in order to not go against the grain. I'm tired of not going against the grain. You know what? I have a daughter. I have a 6-year-old daughter who will be 7 in November, and she's a part of our public school system. So to not go against the grain and not talk about what's blatantly in our face is disrespect to my daughter. I'm no longer going to disrespect my daughter. There's work that needs to be done. I'm a part of that work. There's work I need to do as well. But we're going to quit looking with blinders on like we don't have issues in our system. To be totally transparent, I'm quite frankly appalled at our system right now. I'm appalled. I don't feel right. It doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well in my soul. We are in a space where our top priority, our top objective, our great expectation is to ensure that we have a body in front of our kids. That's what we've come to. Our work for the last several weeks has been to ensure that we have a body in front of our kids. I don't want just a body in front of my daughter. I don't want just a body in front of any student. I want a qualified teacher who knows content, who knows how to deliver effective pedagogy, and knows how to make connections with my child and the rest of the children across New York City. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. And you know what? And I'm not taking anything away from any employee, because everybody who I've seen is working their tails off to try to get it right. So I know people are working, but we can't possibly think that the bar is getting a body in front of kids. Then what? Then what? People have always said for years that educators are nothing but glorified babysitters, and now that's what we've come to. We didn't get it right in the spring, and we didn't get it right now. Sometimes you got to take a step back, look in the mirror, and admit that you didn't get it right, and ask for help. I believe that there are some of the smartest people in our city who can help us, who are inside the system of education and outside the system of education. Let's reach out to those people. Those people including parents, teachers, principals, assistant principals, every stakeholder. Bring them to the table. Let's pull back all the issues and come up with a viable plan of execution. And granted, that plan of execution is not going to please everyone. We know that. But when the bar is set at just getting a body in front of kids, that's when I got a problem. And I can no longer be silent. Because my silence is saying that it's okay for my child. And it's not. It's not okay for my child. It's not okay for any child. It's not. Some people may not like what I'm going to say. Some people may not like the words, "Oh, I can't believe you're saying that." No, I can't believe more people aren't saying that. I put 20 plus years into this system. I love what I do. I love making a difference in the lives of children. But we are crumbling dreams, and we got a blind eye to it. Can't be blind anymore. We just got to face the facts that we didn't get it right. We didn't get it right. Let's scrap what we have on the table, go back to the drawing board, and have students engage in remote learning until we get it right. And I know remote learning is not the answer for everyone. It's not. But we can't ignore the fact that COVID's not right around the corner, ready to knock back on our doors again. And to the people who had COVID, granted, we lost so many. We know that. We've all know somebody at this point who has succumbed to the virus. We all know somebody who had the virus and is now in the phase of regrouping and getting back to their normal selves. We have people who have bounced back 100%. I'm one of those people. I had COVID. I've mentioned before, 26 days of pure hell. And I gotta take my healed self, who now has COVID phobia, I'm not gonna front. I'm wary to even be around people and touch people. But I gotta go into schools, several schools, interacting with several principals, interacting with several staff members, several groups of students, and then come home to my family and pray to God that I don't bring any of that in the house. You can't just feed us to the wolves. You can't just feed our children to the wolves, our staff to the wolves. We're not guinea pigs. I'm already being furloughed, so it's obvious I'm not an essential worker. And that's okay, I get it. We gotta do things to revive the economy. Take my 5 days. But at the same time, when you say that I'm gonna take 5 days from every city employee, that's not fair. And I'm gonna tell you why it's not fair. It's not fair because not every employee is equal. We are equal people, but we don't do the same job. We don't get paid the same amount of money. So that 5 days is going to impact me a lot differently than it's going to impact somebody else. I'm going to be able to bounce back from that 5-day furlough. My family's going to be able to bounce back and be okay. But there's families out there that you're going to hit with that 5-day furlough who aren't going to have any idea how to make up for that loss. And I'm just tired of watching these decisions get made day after day to just continue to dig us and put us in a deeper hole. We're better than that. I respect our educational leaders. I respect our government. And if you respect us as a people, then you need to do a better job of bringing us to the table, engaging us in conversation around these difficult topics, because they are difficult. And I know that your jobs are hard. Absolutely. It's probably the hardest part of your job that it's ever been. But get the right people around you. Get the right people around you to talk you through these decisions. Get the right people around you to push back appropriately so that we can ensure that when these decisions are presented to the public, they're in the best interest of children, in the best interest of people, in the best interest of our city. We got work to do. Shame on our city. Shame on us. But I do have faith. I'm a believer that in the midst of chaos, excellence will emerge. And I don't have all the answers. And I will never, ever act like I do. But I'm absolutely willing to come sit at the table. I'm absolutely willing to roll up my sleeves and do whatever I can to ensure that children receive the quality education they rightfully deserve. And not just that, but just to make sure that people are being taken care of in general. We gotta slow down. We gotta slow down. We gotta do things better and make better choices for our people. Until then, we got work to do. Listen, continue to chop it up with us. Continue to send in your messages, your emails. Continue to comment. I love interacting with you. And make sure, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. Follow me on my social media platforms. Look, we just gonna keep this thing rolling. Cocktails and Convo. See you soon.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Cocktails and Convo. Let's talk about it. Cocktails and Convo.